Mario, just give us broad strokes first. What is flow like right now? What's coming in? How easy is it to offload, and where is it going?
Well, thank you, Alex. First of all, it's a very robust movement here at the Port of Long Beach. You know, our October number, we moved 987,000 TEUs. That's a 113-year record. In other words, historical record. So it's very robust. No delays, no congestion, no bottlenecks.
What do you make of the strength? Is it a consumer demand? Is it a holiday demand and the season is going to be really good? Is it stockpiling into the new year? What is your read on that?
It's all of the above. I mean, the good news is, Alex and Romaine, a couple years ago, we were talking about whether or not we were going to have these goods on the shelf during the holiday season. So what a big change now. Consumer demand continues to be very robust. On the other hand, we are benefiting here in the San Pedro Bay complex from the ILA discussions, the labor discussions in the East and Gulf, which some of that cargo is being diverted to the West Coast. And in addition, the whole issue about the tariff discussion has caused our shippers to kind of front load some of the imports. So we're seeing those two factors leading to the surge that we've experienced here in the last quarter of 2024.
I'm curious, Mark.
2025.
Yeah, gotcha. I'm curious, Mario, if you just kind of explain for our viewers, too. I mean, when we talk about what goes down at the Port of Long Beach, the majority, right, or the biggest percentage of stuff coming into that port is coming from China. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. I mean, it's over 2/3 of our imports come from China here at the Port of Long Beach.
And so if we get like an increase in tariffs, and we already have those tariffs in place, so if we get that extra 10 percentage points or whatever the Trump administration has said that it might impose, would that materially change the flow of what's coming from China? I mean, I understand how new tariffs on Mexico and Canada would certainly change flows, but does an additional 10 percentage points really change much for what people would be buying?
Well, given that we've been here before with regard to the initial tariff implementation in the first Trump administration, which actually was continued by the Biden administration, I don't see a material change that's going to impact the flow. I know that, again, we don't know exactly what that looks like in terms of what the plan, but preliminarily, I mean, we can't be dismissive of the concern that it could impact our import volume and export market. But again, we've been in that tariff environment now for a few number of years.
How do you see the pricing for that? Like, if we do get tariffs, which then affect goods coming in, like, who winds up paying for that at the end of the day?
Well, initially, when we went through the tariff discussion or the experience in the first Trump administration, and again, continued by the Biden administration, initially, the shippers kind of bore the cost. In other words, they didn't pass that on to the consumer. However, as we move forward to a couple of years into that tariff implementation, they started to pass that on to the consumer. So we do see that this potentially could have that residual passing on that price to the consumer and to our business entities.
Talk a little bit about labor for a moment. Obviously, you guys aren't involved in the International Longshoremen's Association issues with the U.S. Maritime Alliance. That's affecting the Gulf Coast as well as the East Coast. What's your read on that? Are you noticing anything that flows that are happening in relation to that?
Well, from the San Pedro Bay complex here at the Port of Long Beach, which includes Port of Los Angeles, as I mentioned, we are getting that cargo that's being diverted from the East Coast to the West Coast in a percentile that's healthy. Part of the reason why we have record volume here in the West Coast, particularly here at the Port of Long Beach. So as those negotiations conclude, hopefully, at the beginning of next year, we'll see what happens. Again, my view is that the sooner they come into some solution, the better, because any disruption in supply chain in the nation is not good for the nation's supply chain.
I am curious about some of the modernization efforts that you spearheaded, Mario. I know we talked a lot during the pandemic when every supply chain around the globe had basically been hobbled, and that required a lot of soul searching and a lot of reflection about what a port is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to operate. And I know you spearheaded some changes there. You got some help from the government as well. Is that going to insulate or maybe buffer any sort of potential disruptions that we get in 2025?
Well, it's certainly going to mitigate that potential of disruption. So, for example, as you know, I was a spokesperson for 24/7 operations, admittedly framework of a 24/7. So we have expanded hours of operation, which again accounts for the reason as to why we don't have any bottlenecks or congestion here at the Port of Long Beach. And in addition, the emphasis of cargo, that is on-dock rail movement. Port of Long Beach have invested about $1.5 billion in one of our state-of-the-art endeavors, the Pier B Enhancement Rail Facility. So that's the future in terms of how we put more of this cargo on rail to facilitate, again, not only expediency, velocity, but also, again, to make sure that we get the container out of the terminal ASAP, including the fact that the staging areas, we did a big staging project here at the Port of Long Beach when we had the worst scenarios in the San Pedro Bay complex back in 2021. And again, we continue with that model today.
Have you had any direct communication at all with the president-elect or his surrogates?
No, we do expect to have communication with the administration next year. I mean, that's been the practice of the Port of Long Beach. When we have an administration, whether it's current or a new administration, we make sure that we have those discussions of collaborative spirit with the administration. So that's the practice, and we expect to continue that in this new administration.